listening to the ProgAxia podcast.
Hi and welcome to the second part of our Best Progressive Rock of 1975. Next on our little playlist is...
Next on your list was... Oh, let me just hold it up. I'm not sure anybody needs any explanation of what this... So, Wish You Were Here. I mean... Just what an album cover.
Yeah.
Whenever you get the old Hypnosis, best of album cover type stuff, this one is in it along with whatever the preceding album was. I forget. But how do you follow up something like Dark Side of the Moon? I mean, all the problems to have in the world. We've just sold alone, going to sell more. What are we going to do next?
It's really weird because I guess that everybody would say that Dark Side of the Moon is the pinnacle of Pink Floyd, and they'd be right. It was probably one of the most astounding albums of the time, and it still is an astounding album. So how do you follow it up? Wish You Were Here. And I don't think there's any point in saying whether it is as good as not as good as. It's just another album. And having said that, having actually heard the words come out of my mouth, it's just another album. I'm going to go and punch myself in the face because just go through the tracks here, right? Shining Your Crazy Diamond, Part 1 to 5. Which is what I put onto the show.
Yep.
Again, it's about 15 minutes of music. That first part.
Yep.
It tops and tails with Shining Your Crazy Diamond. So at the end of it, track 5 is Shining Your Crazy Diamond, Part 6 till 9. Okay. And I could have put the whole bloody lot on, which I normally do on shows. I normally mix things together and stuff like that. But you've got Shining Your Crazy Diamond, which is astonishing in its own right. Okay. Welcome to the Machine. Mind-blowing track. Have a Cigar. Again, a mind-blowing track. Wish You Were Here. Again, a mind-blowing track. Every single track on this is quintessential, ultimate Pink Floyd. And so is it as good as Dark Side of the Moon? Yes, I think it bloody is.
I do too. Obviously after this they did Animals. So follow up Dark Side with Wish You Were Here and Animals. I mean that's a great run of albums. Yeah, and they weren't milking a formula because they are really very different. And Wish You Were Here. So you chose Shine On You Crazy Diamond. And I'm sure most people have heard the story about how Sid Barrett shuffled into the recording studio and people didn't recognise who this fat balding guy with a Tesco's carrier bag or whatever was, and that was all very poignant. And so Shine On, I think a lot of people think about it because of of Gilmour's 4-note, but of course that's. I say, of course, I think this is right. That's part 3, isn't it? Because you got parts 1 and 2 beforehand. And you got Rick Wright's contribution to this album, which I think is fantastic.
Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful.
They really were, a band at the time. There's obviously later problems around Rick, late great Mr. Wright. But his intros to this, how to just seemingly not do very much, but make it really interesting and draw you in. Before Dave comes in with his bit, and also the very last part of Shine On to close out side 2. I think that's a lovely little basically solo, isn't it? Just sort of him doing what he did so well. So so Shine On. It's not just about that guitar; it's also about what Rick Wright did as well. And Welcome to the Machine, as you mentioned as well. Yeah, he found a new toy and he was going to use it. But he used it well, absolutely.
Using it well is such an understatement as well, isn't it? It's like all musicians can take instruments and use them, But if you as you say, like the sort of intro to Shine On, and that long keyboard intro. And then that guitar comes in, and it to me, this is why I think when you talk about, is it as good as Dark Side of the Moon? That concept, just that keyboard intro and that 4 notes on the guitar is better than anything they'd ever done. It just is just so perfect. And it's given themselves time. This is why I like progressive rock, because it gives you permission to not try and squeeze everything into 3 minutes.
Absolutely.
You can spread out. If you want to do something which is, an intro that's going to take 5 minutes, take 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Because when you're sitting there with your headphones on in your beanbag, when you're 17 years old, that's going to take you somewhere else.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if you think pre-Dark Side, Floyd were known for stretching out a bit, weren't they, with some of their early stuff, Astronomy Domine and Interstellar Overdrive and all that. And I guess with Dark Side, they're a bit more concise, bit more sort of shorter stuff. And I guess I've no idea, but they spent 2 years thinking what we're going to do next. And didn't they have this project called Household Objects and stuff when they were trying to work out how to get how to put a bunch of elastic bands together to make it sound like a bass guitar, and then they realised, why don't we just use a bass guitar? But I think they kind of said, we've sold a lot. We're going to sell a lot more of Dark Side, so it's given us permission to just do a bit of both with some of the more concise Dark Side stuff, some of the stretchy out stuff that we did beforehand, and not just on Shine On. Wish You Were Here, the title track, takes its time and it's brilliant for doing so. It's absolutely fantastic. Let's just spend a few minutes and somebody listening to the radio and trying to imitate the guitar player, etc. So absolutely, they gave themselves permission and they did it well. And it's not I don't think it's not self-indulgent. It's not dragging it out. I think it's got the timing and the pacing of it dead right.
Yeah.
And
well, they must have been doing something right. They sold over 20 million copies of it.
Yeah. I guess it begs the question: if they hadn't released Dark Side, would it have sold 20 million? I don't know, but yes,
probably
you're right.
Not.
There's probably not. But you're right. There's no point saying is it as good as or whatever. It's a good album. It's a very good album. So
fantastic album. So good. Right, let's start with this one here, which is
next up is Peter Hammill.
Peter bloody Hammill and Nadir's Big Chance.
Peter Hammill, legend.
Peter bloody Hammill. Right. Are you familiar with this one? Is this another one of your?
Because this got name checked by Johnny Lydon, John Lydon, didn't it? As being he talked about Nadir's Last Chance as being one of the once he got past a little phase in his life and he could come out, because he didn't he famously have some sort of show on, was it Capital Radio or something, when Malcolm McLaren got a bit upset because he was ruining the punk cred by talking about all this other stuff, and caring about music. And Johnny had a few choice words to say about, I'm being true to myself. Isn't that what it's all about, mate?
Yeah.
So I was aware of it because, hang on a minute, if that guy is prepared to say it's a good album, it's got to be worth listening to. And Hamill, again, back to the earlier point, he's so interesting. Everything he does, I mean, heart on the sleeve type stuff. I mean, you can just feel his emotion, I think, in all the stuff. Certainly his solo works, some of the Van der Graaf and Van der Graaf generator stuff, it perhaps gets lost a bit in the maelstrom. But, his solo stuff, which tends to be a bit sparser, I think you really get his raw emotion coming through. I think fascinating guy. Still going strong, still releasing stuff, still trying new stuff. But anyway, back to this album, which I don't have.
Well, Nadir's Big Chance for me, again, it's still performed by a reformed Van der Graaf generator lineup. You've still got David Jackson in there, Hugh Banton's in there, Guy Evans on drums. It's still Van der Graaf generator. But and again, last time we had the podcast, I said to you, maybe some of these things were contractual. You said you didn't think they were. I don't really know what the answer is to it. No. But John Lydon, I remember you telling me before about John Lydon played a couple of tracks I think off this album, one of them being Nobody's Business.
Yeah.
Which is a great track. In fact, everything on here is a really good track. I think you've got to be, if you're not into Van der Graaf and you're not into Peter Hammill, it may be a little bit of a difficult album to get into. Would you say?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I'd agree with that.
Because it's quite punky.
It is punky. It's punky. It's rocky, but it's also because you chose "Been Away So Long," didn't you? As your track off of this, but it's also, as I think Hammill is in his own way, because I don't think he's been classically tutored, has he? Just the way he goes about his phrasing, his vocal phrasing, and his piano play. But it's poetic as well. It's melancholic. So I think there are entry points there. But I mean, where would you start? Open question. Where would you start with? If someone said, "No, give me the easiest, most accessible Peter Hammill solo album," it's like,
probably Enter K, which was done in the 80s.
Yeah. Well, give me really
get you into the voice, but not sort of blow your head too much. But no, I mean, the track I chose, "Been Alone So Long," was written by Judge Smith, who was a founder member of Van der Graaf just 8 years ago. And it's like a bit of a sort of a hat tip, I think, to a little bit of the past of Van der Graaf. But, the album is it's sort of a punky album. You've got to remember, this was 1975. And things were changing, and instead of Peter Hammill just going, "No, I'm not going to bother with this new stuff that's coming out," he just went, "I'm going to be the godfather of this stuff." If it's getting more aggressive, I'm going to get more aggressive because I know how to do aggressive, which he does. I mean, you can actually see where the Sex Pistols got their inspiration. Nadir's Big Chance could have been sort of the genesis of anarchy in the UK. There's some tracks on here. In fact, there's some sounds on here, specifically guitar sounds on here. I never noticed this before, but just listening back to this, and after listening to Nevermind the Bollocks by the Sex Pistols, you can actually hear some guitar sounds on here, or guitar phrasings on here, that were just transferred straight into Anarchy in the UK. Or Nevermind the Bollocks album, but specifically Anarchy in the UK. It just struck me as, that sounds just like the guitar sound in Anarchy in the UK. Isn't that weird? And it's it's Peter Hammill, progressive rock god. Well, one of mine.
Yeah. No, I think I may have mentioned before that Steve Jones in his autobiography is very open about the fact that he was a student of music. They bonded over their love of Mott the Hoople, and Steve Jones talks about how much time he spent in the studio, getting the guitar just right and doing the overlay there, the multi-tracking of it just right. And this wasn't let's just have a thrash and it's all going to be okay. Him and Chris Thomas, I think, was a recording engineer, spent ages on this, getting it right. Yeah. So they were students of music to a degree. They had heard this stuff. They did want to emulate it, even if the public image had to be slightly different.
I've noticed over the time I've been doing podcasts with you, you're really good at this crap,
Upon my soul, yes.
Linking,
I would say this is as good an album as any to start with if you want to get into some Pete Hammill, and like all the great progressive music. I think it does get you thinking a bit, just the way he goes about what he says, how he says it.
I think you're actually, that's a really good point there, Paul, because it's no good just listening to an album. Read the bloody lyrics at the same time, because it's for some reason it just sort of pulls it all in. You just get it straight away. Pete Hammill.
It's a very broad church we worship in here, isn't it? Because there's stuff like Mahavishnu and Soft Machine, and I just listen to it in complete awe and think I'm never going to be anywhere near any of this, so that's fine. Listen to stuff like Pete Hammill and think, maybe I could. Then you realise you couldn't. But it almost seems.
I think it is inspirational, because it's with Peter Hammill stuff and Van der Graaf stuff. Right from the early days, it was always, here's my sleeve. I'm going to wear my heart on there.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to tell you how I feel.
Yeah.
Now that might put people off who like stories about Tiresias and
Hmm.
returns of giant hogweeds and things like that. But the thing is that Genesis and Van der Graaf were influences on a lot of the neo-prog bands. Those two bands were probably the biggest influences on a lot of those neo-prog bands, along with Yes and stuff like that. But I think Peter Hammill just gets slightly forgotten in the mists of time, and shouldn't be, because he was one of the giants.
Yeah, so and he's still going. He's doing some work recently with Scandinavian, isn't it? Isildur's Bane. He's just doing stuff. He released an album recently. I think it was entirely in Italian. I think. Yeah,
he's really a pioneer. I mean, he's not. He never sits on his laurels. No. He's a pioneer of progressive rock music, and for that he should be, hailed as
lauded. Yeah. Stuart McConey, Radio 6, has a freak show thing Sunday nights, 8 till 10, I think. And he was on it a couple of months ago, just gave an interview, just now chatting down the phone line with McConey. It's probably on, I don't know, some podcasting somewhere. But really interesting just to listen to this guy. And he comes across as just, genuine, humble, guy that you could easily have a beer with and just sit there and go, you're a legend. Anyway, Hammill, great.
Yep. Next one.
Chris
Squire, Fish Out of Water.
Yes.
Very, very, very interesting album, this.
Fisheye photo from inside.
Yep. Great album cover. Lots of people on this.
Yes.
Bill Bruford.
Yep.
Which makes the that whole rhythm section just sing.
Yep.
It just really feels good. But it's a very, very laid back sort of album.
It's got Patrick Moraz on it as well.
Moraz is on it.
It's got Mel Collins, Jimmy Hastings of Caravan fame.
Yep. Jimmy Hastings.
Aren't aware. Yep.
And I think one of the things that strikes me with this is that I remember buying this. Buying the vinyl at the time and thinking it was going to be like Yes. And what it was all Chris Squire. It was just everything that Chris Squire is on this, melodic, and he's got a great voice. I mean, he could have led any band with his vocals.
Yeah, it's a bit like sort of the Collins stuff with Gabriel, isn't it?
Yeah.
You suddenly realise how much Collins contributed to the Gabriel vocal sound, and you realise how much Squire obviously contributed to the John Anderson vocal sound, as did Steve Howe, of course, as well. But
when Yes started, they started as a vocal harmony group.
Yeah.
Back in the day, that was the idea behind it. Was they were going to do a vocal harmony type, very acoustic group.
Squire was a chorister, wasn't he? I think in his early days. I think I read that somewhere.
Yeah.
But you mentioned Bruford. I think Patrick Moraz as well. I think there's some great stuff here from Moraz, because this is the time when they were all doing their solo albums, weren't they? Having a little break. And I've got them all. The other ones came out the following year, didn't they? Which I guess we'll talk about some other time. But I actually think this is the best of their solo albums that all the Yes members brought out in that little sort of hiatus they had. I think it's got some great stuff on it, and sort of quite moving in its way as well. I do. You chose Silently Falling, didn't you? Which is a great track.
Yeah. I could have put Hold Out Your Hand or Lucky Seven. In fact, Lucky Seven is a big favourite of mine, only because it's got that typical Bruford drums on it. He plays like a cross tempo on the track.
Yeah.
It just makes it sound like a sort of strange rhythm, but it's not. But it's typical Bruford, with that high snare, and just makes that so. And what you also notice with this album is that it's not jammed full of solos. It's not jammed full of stuff. It's very open and sparse, and with the bass just taking a lot of the melody which obviously it's his album, so he's going to put a lot of his bass up front, but it feels like it should be there. It's not done just because it's his album.
Yeah,
it's done because the bass is an integral part of that, but there's a lot more space in this, and I think the tunes are really good, but they are songs. They're not just like bits of music. They are songs. They're verses and choruses and middle eights, and
I'm trying to remember now, back in the mist of time, but I think before I first heard this, I was wondering, is it going to be basically, two 20-minute versions of The Fish?
Yeah.
And it's not. So I think the balance is right.
It's exactly the opposite, isn't it?
We bought it because he's a bloody good bassist, and we want to hear that. But it is a band album. And so you mentioned Bruford. I think Mraz has got a great part to play in it as well. You mentioned Hold Out Your Hand. That to me has got echoes of foreshadows, parallels, which was come up a bit later. I think I can hear some traces of that in that.
Yeah.
It's a proper. And again, a bit like the Hackett Voyage of the Acolyte. It's sort of intriguing to think what it might have sounded like if Yes had recorded it, because I think, if Steve Howe had been involved, the rest of it could have been an absolutely fantastic Yes album as well. But it's still a very good album.
Yeah, you mentioned Jimmy Hastings as well.
He
obviously played with his brother Pye in Caravan and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But he was also in things like Soft Machine, Hatfield and North. National Album. I mean, he had Trapeze and stuff like that. He had lots of legacy going on there. I mean, he wasn't there just because he sort of walked off the street. But the flute playing on it is lovely as well. I mean, everything on it is really it's lovely.
Yeah,
it's not challenging. Anyway, it's not like challenging progressive rock.
No,
it's a really good album full of really good songs, played brilliantly with some brilliant musicians. And as I say, just having Bruford on there as a drummer gives it a vibe. With Chris Squire's slightly phased bass, he had that sound on his bass. That's that sort of beautifully phased sort of sound, and Bruford's sparse but just perfectly pinpointed drumming just makes the album just a gorgeous listening.
Yeah,
really does.
Yeah, and I say of the solo albums, get this one first. I'd recommend if you haven't got the others.
This is a classic,
and get Alan White's Ramshackled Last. I'd suggest. Anyway, sorry, Alan.
Next one up.
Yes. I've only got this on CD.
Well, I'm only doing CD, so I couldn't be bothered to get all the bloody vinyl out. So, music inspired by the Snow Goose.
Yes, as you probably know, they had to add that.
Yes.
Probably why you dramatically emphasise.
That's why I was so dramatic.
Yes, because in case anyone's not aware, when they first brought it out, he just said Snow Goose, and I found it intriguing. So the estate of Paul Calico, who wrote the novella, they got in touch to say, "Oh, you can't do that." And just like I'm just slightly bemused that the estate of Paul Calico would find the time and effort and the energy and the desire to actually just anyway. So yes, the subsequent pressings all had to say music inspired by rather than the Snow Goose.
I mean, completely short-sighted by Paul Calico's lawyers or whatever. Interesting novel as well, but that's beside the point. I don't want to sort of promote that because he's they shouldn't have done that. So they had to call it the music inspired by the Snow Goose. Pathetic, because I mean on the album it's so small right at the top there. It's like, music inspired by the Snow Goose.
And whenever we refer to the album, none of us actually say music inspired. We just say Snow Goose, don't we?
Snow Goose,
What the heck?
It made no point whatsoever. But again, Latimer and Barden's. This is let's face it, this is a classic Camel album. This is probably the one that a lot of people know.
Yeah. It's quite. I was about to say it's quite lyrical. There's no vocal. I think there's a very brief smattering of vocals at the end, isn't there? But there's no vocals. It's an instrumental album. But it's a lyrical instrumental album. If that makes sense.
Yes, it does.
That's a lot of that's down to Latimer's guitar style. You chose Flight of the Snow Goose, but in a way, you could almost chosen anything. I think off of this album, it's a sort of seamless. Listen to it, and
it's classic Camel. Everything on it is classic Camel.
Yeah.
And it's got nothing to do with Snow Geese. Well,
well, did you know? Because there is
it sort of does in the book. I mean, without putting spoilers in, the girl at the end holds this dying snow goose, and it's a metaphor for stuff. But no, it starts with this haunting track, the Great Marsh. I mean, just it sort of sets the tone of the album so well. And as I say, a bit of departure from Mirage. I mean, it doesn't sound like Mirage, but it still sounds, both Mirage and this sound like Ultimate Camel to me.
Yeah.
But a bit of a departure from Mirage.
Yeah. Did you know how they got? Because there's some sound effects of some sort of like geese flapping their wings on one or two of the tracks. Do you know how they got that sound effect?
Well, I could stab some guesses, but it'd be probably easier if we just told us.
Apparently, there's some duffel coats that they just sort of like they just flap some duffel coats around in the recording studio and went, "Yeah, that sounds like a snow goose flying." That'll do.
The weird thing is, though, that sounds funny, but you know this whole concept of folio. You know, when people put sound onto films, you have a folio artist.
Yeah.
And if you actually watch them when they're doing things like, footsteps in snow and you like using, rocks on talcum powder.
Exactly.
So it seems quite logical, you just imagine them in the studio.
Yeah.
Right. We need some geese sounds here. Grab those duffel coats from over there.
Exactly.
Stick a mic over there and just flap them a bit.
Yeah. And it works.
Oh, that sounds fantastic. Yeah. I don't know why I'm doing that voice for an engineer.
I don't know either. I wasn't going to mention it. But it's one of those albums you sort of know. It's not an album I would dip into. It's an album I'd start and listen all the way through.
Yeah. Oh, but it's like those, because again, concept albums tend to drive you to listen to the whole thing.
Yeah. It just flows, doesn't it? It flows. I mean, it's not good for the Spotify generation, I guess. You need to. It tells me you need to put aside the 43 minutes and 22 seconds that is required to listen to it all. So lovely.
I don't think any of this stuff really sort of panders to the Spotify generation, to be honest.
Whatever.
I mean, I listen to stuff on Spotify, but I still have the old ways of doing things. I've got the old ways, Paul.
Not getting any younger.
No, it's a great album. Some incredible music.
Yeah,
being based on a book, I think it's also it was a little light in places, but that is concept albums where you've got some time to go and do those things. You can pull it down a little bit. You don't have to have that hit after hit after hit. You can.
That's not really Camel style either, is it? I mean, it's great.
No.
Yeah.
But sometimes it feels like they're trying to write a piece for every part. That's the only slight criticism when I listen to it nowadays. It's sometimes with concept albums you can go, I've got to write a bit for this and a bit for this and a bit for this and a bit for this. And sometimes it does feel like it's a little bit sort of trying to write bits for parts rather than just let's go and write some music and see where it takes us. But still, it's still a great album.
Yeah, absolutely. But I take your point on that. I think, if they'd have wanted to, they could have, stripped out a bit and made it a very, very good 35-minute album as opposed to, 40 to 20 minutes.
It's like a lot of things like this. But it is what it is, and we should love it for what it is, and I do.
Yep.
Cool. Getting on to the last couple now.
Yeah.
And interesting ones, I think. Greenslade.
Yes.
This is Time and Tide by Greenslade.
I don't have this one.
I'll stick this up.
Yep.
Can you see that? Time and Tide by Greenslade. I took off the Ass's ears. I could have took off anything from this. Have you listened to this one in recent years?
Well, yes, because I was at a festival recently, HOH Prog, always fun. and Greenslade were there, so it just sort of rekindled. And I actually got off of Discogs. I'm sure you're familiar with Discogs.
Yeah.
Great site. I got the Pentateuch of the Cosmogony.
Right.
For the artwork, not for the booklet and everything, not for the music as such. So yes, rekindled my my interest in Greenslade. So it's quite catchy, isn't it? It's quite poppy and catchy.
Yeah.
And perhaps not as keyboard heavy, not as keyboard heavy as I was perhaps expecting when I.
Which is weird when he's got two keyboard players in it.
Yeah, I know. But sort of like listen to it, thinking, I've got my preconceptions of Dave and what he gets up to, and so I was slightly surprised when I heard it actually. I don't. Was your experience the same?
Well, I've loved this album for years, but to me it's sort of not it's like not an out and out prog album, but has all the prog ephemera.
Yeah.
It's got all the sounds you'd expect from a great prog album. Again, got to remember it's 1975. This is the sort of formative days in some ways. We said we're sort of in the middle of that era, but it's still 1975. And Dave Lawson's vocals on it are fine. They're not brilliant, and they're not different to everybody else. And it sounds like he's trying to sound like a rock singer, and does a bloody good job. I mean, don't get me wrong; it sounds perfectly fine. But this is more of a rock and roll type of album in some ways. It's sort of like a cross between sort of straight 70s rock and prog. So and the As's Ears sort of demonstrate this in a way, which is the track I put on. But again, they're formed in like 72.
Yeah, I think so, something like that. Yeah,
and they went through quite a few different stages, but you've got. As I said, there's a lot of stuff going on here. You've got Patrick Woodruff cover, which is the reason why I bought the bloody thing in the first place. Yeah. To be honest, I just thought it was really, really cool cover. But there's some stuff in it. Sounds, some really sort of nice mellotron, like on Tide. Some lovely mellotron sounds. I mean, it's very Genesis-y.
Yeah.
The recording's excellent. Very immersive. I think any prog fan would love to listen to this. So it's a good album, but it's not one of my 100% favorite albums in the world, but an album I do love. I think it's a great album. There's songs in there. Just have a look at what they've got on this. So Time and Tide are both good.
I agree with that.
Yeah, As's Ears I really love. Gangsters is good. Flatbury Snakes is good. They're all good tracks. But they're not. This isn't a classic album. But the reason why I put it onto the show is because stuff like this does seem to get lost. Everybody's heard of Greenslade, and if you talk to anybody who likes prog, have you heard of Greenslade? Oh yeah, brilliant album covers. First thing they say.
Yeah.
Because they had Roger Dean, Woodruff, they had all these great things, but the albums are really good. Bedside Manner's really good. They're all great albums, and I don't think they should be lost, especially because Dave Greenslade is a great keyboard player. He really is a great good keyboard player, and I believe still going. I think Greenslade still popping up recently.
But see, for me, I don't put them in the great categories because
they're not in the great category. You're totally right. They're not in the great.
I don't get to the end of an album and think, I've got to listen to that album again. Either now or in the next week. It's one that's like, okay, I'll put that back in the in the rack along with.
I pick this up every so often.
Yeah,
and any Greenslade album, I might have a bit of a listen to, and I'll enjoy it. It's a good thing, but they're not pinnacle prog.
No.
but I just don't want them to be forgotten. Simple as that, really.
Yep.
Right, next one up.
One of your
Scheherazade,
and other stories. Yes, Renaissance. So we've spoken about Renaissance the last couple of years that we've spoken about, haven't we? And
yes.
So we talked about Ashes, we talked about Turn the Card, and see the first album I got in that sort of sequence was this one, Scheherazade.
Right.
And I liked it. Yeah. We've spoken before about Annie Haslam's incredible voice and the orchestration, and it's beautiful. I like it. So I've got a soft spot for this one, and I think, as I was perhaps referring to when we spoke about the others, when I listened to the others that preceded it, I thought, well, they're kind of the same to me. I can't hear that much of a difference. So, the one I got and the one I'll always go back to is this one. I do like this, but I think you could pick any of those three. I just wouldn't listen to all three back to back. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. It does. I mean, I'm a big sort of Renaissance fan. I've been for years. And I think in the last time we spoke about Renaissance, you were saying that the reason why you didn't like, or you didn't rate them so much, is because they didn't progress. And I totally agreed with your point. They don't. I mean, they don't. They're not a progressive rock band in that. They fall into the genre.
Yeah,
they fall into the sort of, if you like this band, you'll probably like this band.
Yeah,
that sort of, they fall into this.
Yeah.
But they are totally unique.
Yeah,
I mean, no one sounds like Renaissance. I mean, no one. There's been a few bands after them that sort of tried to sort of sound a little bit like Renaissance because they are big fans of Renaissance.
Yeah,
and never really worked out. But this album, like a lot of the albums of that time, are pretty big for me, and this one is another one. Not quite as much as things like Turn of the Cards and stuff like that, but the actual sort of that 24-minute track, Song of Scheherazade, to me is just incredibly impressive. Again, you've got that Terry Sullivan and John Camp rhythm section, which I think is strangely the key that holds everything together. John Camp and Terry Sullivan as a rhythm section is just incredible. Just drives everything and makes Renaissance. Especially John Camp's bass. I mean, it's always blown my mind. Always will blow my mind. I had him on the podcast a little while ago, and it was like talking to. I'm just such a massive fan. It's ridiculous when you talk to someone like John Camp, and he's so nonchalant about it. It's I introduced him as the legend John Camp, and he went, he just started. It's like, yeah, whatever. But because he doesn't, he just sees himself as a bass player. I'm just a bass player. I just do the gig. But he's so bloody good. He just hits everything in the pocket so nicely, and with Terry's drums as well, they just fit everything together. And then you've got John Tout on the keyboards, and Michael Dunford on acoustic guitars and stuff like that, and then Annie Haslam vocals over the top, and you just got this band that just brings in this music. And they don't progress every single album. They bring in all other stuff, but they've got this another brilliant Renaissance album. And the track I took off this was Ocean Gypsy, only because it's a big favourite of mine. It's again a big one that sort of they play live a lot. Love it. I absolutely love that. I could have played Song of Scheherazade, but there are some parts in it that I'm, when you're on a radio show. See, I love it when I'm listening to it on a radio show. It probably doesn't gel so well on a radio show. Whereas Ocean Gypsy just flies through, and it's 7 minutes of glory. It's just 7 minutes of Renaissance glory. I love it. But it's just beautiful Renaissance.
And back to we're talking about the Gentle Giant earlier. They sort of found their formula, hadn't they? I mean, that's basically what I think what we're saying. They'd found their formula. It worked. They had a loyal fan base. It wasn't huge. they're never spoken about in the sort of like the Premier League of progressive rock bands. You know, they're sort of solid championship side. And it just strikes me, Andy, that this discussion we're having about this particular album, this particular track, sounds very much like the previous discussions about the previous albums and the previous.
I think that's really the point, though, isn't it? I mean,
it sounds slightly curmudgeonly of me, but it's just
does, and I think you should go and slap yourself over the hand with a ruler.
I'll find some wet lettuce and do something with it.
Cool. Final one.
Yeah, interesting one. Yes.
Oh man.
Yeah, very interesting.
Right. Mainstream.
Yeah.
Is the album. Quiet Sun is the band.
Yeah.
And I know that you don't know this one.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
How do I know that? Because no sod does. Right? Everybody I've ever talked to about it. I bought this years ago. I mean, I got the vinyl next door. I bought this years ago. And I've always loved it, and I just thought it was just another great album. It was a one-off, really.
Yes, yeah. Well, it was a one-off. It's the only album they did, wasn't it?
It's the only album that was within this format. Like the band was around before that.
They were old schoolmates, weren't they? They're old schoolmates, apparently.
Yeah, I mean, just for people who don't know, you got Phil Manzanera, who is ex. Roxy Music, well, not ex Roxy Music, just he was part of the Roxy Music. I don't know if he was actually left, probably hadn't. But he got his old mates together to do a solo album, essentially. But I think Roxy had split up.
75. Going through a phase. I'm not quite sure where they were.
But it's a solo album. But the original band, Quiet Sun, had sort of split up in 72 or something like that. So it was well gone. No one was doing anything with it. And Phil Manzanera just basically got this band back together, his old mates back together, and to do this album. And the weird thing is that I know you don't know this, but you will love this. Knowing what you like, this is right up your street.
Because I saw it also had Bill McCormick on it.
Yeah,
who I loved the stuff he did with Matching Mole. And I think Eno makes a sort of fleeting appearance on it as well, doesn't he? So
he does on synthesizers and stuff like that. In fact, there's a lot of people in this that you know from. I mean, it's just why I'm saying it's a sort of it's a lost classic of the Canterbury scene.
Yeah,
it really is. I mean, I know what you like, and I know that this is an album you will go and buy it at some point.
It's on my Christmas wish list. If anyone's listening, Christmas wish list. Quiet Sun, mainstream.
I played Sol Cantieri off it.
Yeah,
and I think I love the intro. I love the guitar intro. Phil Manzanera is a great guitarist, and this album just brings out the prog in him. So you imagine like being in Roxy Music and just having to go jamming every so often. Basically, little bits of guitar in there, but he couldn't spread his wings on this. And this is really a solo album, But I love the intro. It's got tinkling piano with this like distorted guitar over the top. It is a hidden classic, and it's the only album they ever did.
Yeah,
it's overtly progressive. Yeah, it's organic jazz rock, a bit like Hatfield in the North. In fact, as I say, it's very, very Canterbury scene, and I just love it.
Well, you may be responsible for a spike on Amazon as people rush out to buy it. The Amazon algorithm could crash as a result of you promoting this.
Well, you listen to the track from the show, but did you have a chance to ever listen to the rest of the album at all?
No, not yet. No, I've got to track it down. So I say it's on my wish list. People at Discogs, I'm sure, can help me.
Yeah, because it was. I think according to some stuff I read about this, because there's not a lot of information around about this sort of thing.
Yeah.
But it was recorded in something like 20 days or something.
Okay.
And the what they've actually got out of the end of this is incredible. But you should say, you got Bill McCormack. You've also got Brian Eno on it, and the guys from the original band. But oh my God, I swear to God, you will love this. You will absolutely love it.
Right.
Very Hatfield in the North.
Brilliant.
So that's all the tracks that.
Well, I've got some others that didn't make your cut.
Yeah. So let's go on to a few of notables.
So as you'll know, I'm a bit of a Henry Cow fan.
Yes.
So the latest in the line of Darn's Socks. But they also did an album with Slap Happy called Desperate Straits, which has got some, it's got some weird and wonderful stuff. Just try and hold that up there.
Love it.
It goes all over the place. Dagmar Krauser's vocals. But if you want to go a bit more left field and this, talking about solo albums that came out that year. This is Hillage.
Rising Fish. Yeah, sorry, Fish Rising.
Fish Rising, which if not the best, it's certainly one of the best of his solo albums. Really like this, and a lot of this stuff, it still reappears.
Listen, I was an inch away of putting something on from that.
No. And another band that I've always enjoyed, one of the best gigs I ever saw in my life. And people say, well, they're not progressive, are they? Well, they certainly had their moments. Manfred Mann's Earth Band, Solar Fire. And I've just got a real soft spot for this. I think it's a great album. And all the stuff around this sort of time, they were doing stuff like Messing and The Good Earth and so on. And yes, they got a bit more poppy, obviously, as they went along. But earlier on, they did sort of stretch out for a bit. And so Solar Fire, another great album. There we go.
Awesome.
Didn't quite make your cut, but worth.
No, well, I've only got 2 hours, so
exactly.
maybe we should do a 3-hour show. I don't know. Because you also got to remember that this year was, it's the year when Night at the Opera came out, Physical Graffiti came out. What else? Sabotage by Black Sabbath came out.
Yep.
Same year. So there's some cracking stuff. In fact, we should cover some classic rock albums as well on this channel.
Eno brought out a solo album, Another Green World, which is another great one of his early ones as well that year as well. Nectar, I think, released an album as well. So yeah, I'm sure Dylan would have done something interesting. Yes, 75.
And also, didn't Cunning Stunts come out?
I think it might have done. Yes. Yes. It's not an album I tend to listen to, but yes. So
it's not. That's why I probably didn't put much on or put anything on it. It's not my favourite Caravan album, but
got a bit of a pale imitation of themselves. I would suggest at that stage.
Yeah. So we'll leave that to one side. Anyway, Paul, been absolutely brilliant going through this with you. We've got some more coming up. I'm going to obviously do 76. I've done the 76 show.
Yeah,
we'll do 76 at some point. We may do something a little different next time. We've been talking about doing concept albums, top 10 concept albums. So I think that might be a good one. There's a few other ones a few other short shows that I'm thinking about that also the people have been asking for. Different ideas.
76, of course, had 2 fantastic Genesis albums, which I'd love to discuss. As well as Rush doing something as well that year. So yes,
some good stuff in 76, some absolutely classic stuff in 76. Anyway,
all right.
Thanks very much for joining us, Paul, and we'll see you next time. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you like it. If you subscribe, we get a little bit bigger. So subscribe. Thanks, Paul.
Good night.
See you later. Yeah, thanks for joining us on the ProgAxia podcast. Don't forget to like this video and also to leave a comment and subscribe to the channel. It really does help us. We'll see you next time.